You clearly have an inkling, at least, of how talented these gentlemen are, and I'm going to let them tell the story of how they connected with one another and Paul Dorpat, and then they're going to take us on our Insider's Guide to Seattle Now and Then. One thing that they've suggested, we break from a usual tradition, which is to reserve questions for the end. They have in mind a pace and a plan for today's talk that encourages people to raise their hands and ask questions as they are going through this history tour with the photos on the screen. So Sophie Hager-Hume and I will be watching for raised hands, and we'll bring around a handheld mic. So with that, sit back, relax, raise your hands, and enjoy this wonderful show.
I guess I'll start with this mic, but we're going to be roving a little bit because we want to be able to point at the things that we're talking about. As you know, we do the Now and Then column.
Here, this one works. You just need to have it close to your face.
Okay.
That will make it better.
Okay. Ooh, that's great. Well, it's making a noise. Luke said that I just have to push this to get this going.
There we go.
So Jean and I, we've known each other for almost 20 years, but more important, we both know Paul Dorpat from going back 35, 40 years, and each of us has different paths to that relationship with Paul. But Paul, you should know, is a huge. I mean, there is nobody in the. I think everybody's a distant second to Paul in terms of the #1 person in our area who has stimulated more interest in local history through his Now and Then column. Any of you who've been around for a period of time know that Paul started this column in 1982, and this came through a series of booklets that he did. The first one was called 294 Glimpses of Seattle, little booklet for the Seattle Mayor's Small Business Task Force, and that sold for 294 cents. $2.94, and it sold out printings. Eric Lasitas, who's still writing for the Seattle Times, did columns on this booklet, and that sort of launched him into his connection with the Seattle Times. And so every single Sunday, can you imagine, for 37 years, what have you done for 37 years? Every single week, 1,800 columns Paul generated by himself. And this is before the internet, before computers, really. He would take them down to the Times originally. And so he became a real source of information. And being a newspaper guy and doing some history stuff in West Seattle about the bridge and other things, he was a lifeline for me, and we became fast friends. Gene can talk about his relationship with Paul as well. And here's just a sample of his notoriety. He was on the cover of the Times Magazine about 20 years ago, and oops, we skipped ahead. I missed. What's the deal? There we go. And when it came time, well, wait, why is it jumping ahead? Well, anyway, you won't get to see the slide of the three of us. Oh, here it is. It's fine, it's fine. I'm the one who's mixed up, not that. That would be great, that would be great. This is Gene and Paul and I at one of the events that we did together. When it came time for Paul to retire, so to speak, Gene and I became the heirs apparent. Gene, do you want to come up and narrate the last column that Paul did? That's on the next slide.
Let's take a look at it.
Yeah. Let's go backwards. here you go.
Yeah. Well, this was actually Paul's first, whoops. There we go. This was Paul's first column. And it looks exactly at the same spot. And we thought it was only appropriate that we posed Paul on the corner where his career at the Times had begun in end of January 1982. So we got him down there, and I dropped him off, and he had his cane, and then I drove around the corner and parked for a moment in the little lot.
I'm going to pull you back because some people can't see.
Oh, okay.
We can move.
Yeah, we can wander. And I had met Paul actually as a young actor in Seattle, and I was doing a show at Bumbershoot, which rumor has it Paul gave the name to in 1970. It was the Seattle Festival, and he suggested that they name it Bumbershoot. But over the years, we maintained contact, and in about 2004, we had a proposal together to wander the state and do a Washington State Now and Then book, which we brought out in 2007. I drove around the state for a couple of years and took pictures, and the two of us wrote it and put it together.
That's an experience in itself, driving around the state with Paul.
It was, and fortunately Paul was only along for about 10 days of it. So, because true to form, this is a very interesting attribute that Friends of Paul discovered that informed not only his vocation, but his personality. He was deeply neurotic about contact without a camera, with humans, bridges, architecture, streets. He hated open spaces. He was terrified of driving across bridges. But as long as he had a video camera or a still camera in his hands, he could negotiate those spaces. And so there's a series which will never be seen by anyone. Whenever Paul had to drive over the Fremont Bridge from his home in Wallingford, he would have a video camera. And the cameras that he had were the early 80s cameras with actual videotape in them, going on forward to the cameras with chips in them. And there are thousands of trips just going across the Fremont Bridge. And he would store them in a cupboard in his basement. And the miracle was, no one has ever seen them, and I don't think anyone ever will, because they're incredibly tedious. It's just Paul driving across the bridge with a camera pointed out the window or in the front, crossing the Fremont Bridge. Nothing ever changes. It's just a precaution to allow his psyche to go across the bridge with an intermediary, with cameras intermediary. So
it's now and now and now and now.
Forever on.
Next one. So Gene and I took this over in 2019. Now what you have to realize, well, first, he just told you a little bit about Paul's personality. Paul never saw himself to be a historian or a writer for a newspaper. Paul, I think, even to this day, would call himself an artist. And that was where his heart lay. And what happened was this column kind of pulled him into public consciousness and pulled him into a persona that he never anticipated for himself. And so kind of the accidental historian. And we were...
Or does he call himself historian without portfolio?
There we go. That's good. That's good. So what we're going to do today, we took it over in 2019. That sounds precipitous, but it was more, we wanted to make sure that Paul's legacy and his tradition was carried on. Because there was one time about 10 years ago when Paul got mad at the Times and he was going to quit. He was just going to quit. I'm going to stay in my basement and I'm going to finish my Ira Hagelin biography, which he never finished yet. But we had to literally for hours lecture him, Paul, you need to be in the paper because people have short memories. And after you're not there every week, you're not going to have the contacts that you have now. And it's not just that, it's the regularity of a column that's very brief that people turn to right away in the paper because it's so short. that we wanted to carry on and have some fun with and do some things a little differently from Paul, and the Times agreed. You know, we're just freelancers, and you know, what we get from the Times as pay is very little. This is a lot of labor of love. And you'll see some of the things we brought to the column, if you remember the way Paul did it, in the examples. We've got an example after example today. This is not in any kind of chronological order. It's more of just to give you a sense of some of our favorite columns and kind of the story behind each one. So you can go to the next one. Now you saw
part of the history
there
of
we
every
go.
organization is technology challenge.
It's always the tech, isn't it?
Always the tech.
So
Not the tech support, the
There you
tech.
go. That's where it
the column,
Okay, so
The
now
column-
it's working if you want to do it, or you want me to?
All right.
I'd like you to do it.
Well, thank you.
That'd be helpful. The column that came out the week after the final column that Jean just told you about is this one. And we thought it was a good one to start the year with. It's a panorama of downtown. And one of the things that Paul had done and that we've carried on is we tried to bring some of ourselves to our columns. So I saw this. This started out as a postcard. I had bought this at some shop years and years ago. And it's a beautiful postcard from what it turns out to be about 1965. It's after the fair, obviously, with the Space Needle over on the left. But what I personally love about this building, or this column, is that the then photo shows the building without which I would not be possible. That's the Terminal Sales Building, 1921. It's a city landmark. It's a beautiful building at First and Virginia. And my dad, when he came out here in 1947, started work in the 10th floor of that building as a clothing salesman, and then later moved to larger offices later on in his career. But he was in the 10th floor. My mom was working in a dishware shop in the first floor, and that's how they met. And my mom's name was Virginia, so it was all very appropriate. But that was how I led the column in the text. He said, I've got a favorite game that I play with almost anybody who's over in West Seattle, where I live, and we look across at the downtown skyline. We say, what's your favorite building? I say, well, I've got an answer for that for myself. What's your favorite building? You might be thinking some of the same. But then the trick is, where was this shot from? Can you imagine? There's a teeny little part just as you get up to the top of the Magnolia Bridge. And that's the outlook for this. And Jean's beautiful now photo is quite a close match there, you know. And one of the brilliant things about this column format that Paul launched really is he said these columns are like a game of hide and seek. Because people want to say, oh, okay, there's the Seattle Tower, where is it here? You know, what's here that's not here? What's been built up? What's been torn down? And it makes for a great comparison. And this column really, I think, symbolizes the fact that the Times really wants us to keep going with this column because they gave us 2 full pages. Paul rarely got more than a page. So these days, you'll see the Now and Then column most of the time filling 2 full pages. We're very grateful for that. Let's keep going. You know, there's the then, a little bit bigger, and keep going. There's the now. Let's move on to Jean. Jean, what's your next one on?
Ooh. Well, let's just let's get rid of the column image itself and go straight to the then photo. So next image, please. Oops. Let's go back. There we go. So this is the aftermath of the Seattle fire. We all know that there's a handful of pictures taken, and very few, because the photographers who were down in the business district were grabbing their equipment and running. to escape the flames on June 6, 1889. So we do have many, many hundreds and hundreds of images of the months after the fire. And this is one of them in the heart of Pioneer Square. This is the front portion of the Occidental Hotel, which was only about 6 years old when it burned down. So it was a brand new luxury hotel in Pioneer Square. It was replaced by the Seattle Hotel. Seattle Hotel, however, only lasted for about 70 years because in 1960 it was decided by the wise developers of the city to tear it down and replace it with, next slide, the Sinking Ship Garage. So it's on the same footprint, and you can see that the Sinking Ship Garage had knowing that it was close to the waterfront, the Sinking Ship Garage had reflected the basket-shaped windows across the street with these very dainty and elegant railings up top.
This is sarcasm, folks.
But it's generally, you've all been to Pioneer Square, I'm assuming, and generally this place is considered one of the hideous elements of Seattle architecture. The original Seattle Hotel was quite glorious. And in fact, that destruction led to a movement in Seattle led by Victor Steinbrook, who after seeing the Seattle Hotel come down and being replaced, and we needed parking for the World's Fair. You know, visitors were coming to town, they were touring, we had to have parking. But to take down the Seattle Hotel was kind of was considered such an assault on the sensibility of the city. You can draw a direct line between the disappearance of that hotel, the demolition of it, and the salvation of the Pike Place Market. Because what happened then is Steinbrook said, never again will we allow something of beauty to be removed without protest. And so by the end of the decade, the market was saved. That's why we have Victor Steinbrook Park, which we may have time to come back to at the end, at the north end of the market. Back to the Seattle fire, we lost about 120 acres, between 25 and 30 blocks if you add it all up together. And there's a wonderful little quotation when Rudyard Kipling came to town. And he was a young man wandering the world. And as he docked at one of the burned down husks of a dock, I think they were near Yesler's dock, which had burned. And as he docked there, he wrote a description for his European readers. In the ghostly twilight, in the heart of the business quarters, there was a horrible black smudge, as though a hand, capital H, had come down and rubbed the place smooth. I now know what being wiped out means. Well, Seattle Fire was, if you've ever encountered Milton and Paradise Lost, there was an element of the fortunate fall in the Seattle fire, because so many cities around Spokane had just had an enormous fire. All of the wood buildings in all of these cities around the country were catching fire and burning down. And in Seattle, what it allowed us to do was replace everything with brick and stone, which is why when you're in Pioneer Square, you see the dates above all these buildings' doorways, 1890, 1891. And so it became a way to reshape and recreate our city, something Milton actually called the fortunate fall. It allows us to return or to achieve a new form of paradise. And that was they also called that the Seattle spirit that would bring everything back very quickly and reinvigorate it. Let's go forward, Clay.
Next slide there. You know, that was a great example of a maxim in the preservation community, which is sometimes something's got to go down in order for people to be inspired to save what's left. We all know of examples of this. Here's a column that goes against the grain of what we usually do as an approach. We usually start with a then photo that's a great then photo that we can replicate in the now. But this one was just irresistible. I got curious. We've all seen the Amazon spheres downtown. But I was curious, well, okay, what was there before? And turns out it's a bunch of car lots. This photo in the then, next slide, so you can see it bigger. This is one of what's called the tax assessment photos. This is a great story in itself. It could be a half-hour talk, but at Bellevue College, the state archives has a photo of every lot in the county that has standing buildings on it, usually from the late 50s. If it was updated in some way, they would come out and take another photo. This is from December 18th, 1957. You know these photos because of the white lettering that's pinned into the negative. In other words, it's not on the print, it's the negative. So it's not going away. But this was what was on the lot of the Amazon spheres. Now, I get to have some fun with this because if you squint carefully, look at the design of the cars. Each of the cars is this round-topped sphere, right? And so, and they are people inside a sphere. You know, they're riding along in their own self-contained vehicle. And next slide. Here are the spheres today. Gene is a genius photographer. I can't say enough about him, and the color saturation is always phenomenal. But I want to take you to the next slide after this. What I did with this column was not only explore what was in the photo, but what was in the newspaper on the day the photo was taken, December 18th, 1957. And there are a number of examples you can see on our blog, but this is the funniest one, because there was actually a sphere or a dome in a Frederick and Nelson ad. And I know you can't read the type, but it's the ad is for Fredericks, but what can you get at Fredericks? It's something called round-the-clock superb shears. It's stockings. And look at this illustration. This was done, anybody remember Bob Cram, the cartooning weatherman who came after Bob Hale? Bob Cram did art for Frederick and Nelson, and this is one of his cartoons. I've got to get close to get this. The man of tomorrow may fly his super flexiplane to the ultra-chrome dome home of his heart's desire, but the gift that will bring her running to the door will be those beautiful round-the-clock superb shears. Women of any age love the perfect fit that a choice of 42 individual leg patterns gives. Don't wait until 2000 AD, though, to bring your light of love running. I mean, this is the Jetsons before the Jetsons. It's just hilarious. And so this is just an example of how we can have some fun with the column and get some history across too. Yeah.
Was that $1.95? Is that what that is there?
That's $1.95 right there. You've got it. So, how many of you have a pair of round-the-clock superb shears?
I do.
Gene, take us to the next column.
Oh boy. Well, this column contains a ghost story. And, you know, if I hadn't used it at the time that I did, I forget what the date, what's the date of this one? It's September 15th. It actually should have been a Halloween column because it's so strange. For the book we did, which used the top 100 columns, in our opinion, of Paul's history, this is one of the photos that he retook.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you stand to the side, one side or the other, so that they can see?
Okay. I can. Why don't I sit? Wouldn't that be easier? All right. So, in this column, Paul had. One of the things that Paul did is in the early '80s, when he started out his column, he took about the top 100 photos of Seattle history, and he just knocked them down one after another. And I was mentioning this a little earlier, that he forbade us during his tenure to ever repeat a photo. So I arbitrarily decided that it was about time that there were people who had not been born who might be interested in these classic photos of Seattle history. One of them was Princess Angeline, or Kiki Soblu, the daughter of Chief Seattle, who would pose for tourists. This is taken by an unknown photographer, and it is 17 years before the market, Pike Place Market opened in 1890. And to repeat this photo, we tracked down two descendants of Chief Seattle. One, Mary Lou Slaughter, who's, in this photo, she's 80 years old, and is a master weaver of cedar and basket making and clothing and hats. And the other is Ken Workman. They're both Duwamish. And and you can see, there we go. So there's Mary Lou. Oop, back one. There's Mary Lou on the left and Ken. And behind them, we're pretty close to the location where Mary Lou's ancestor sat for her photograph, or Angeline sat. Ken is the great-great-great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle via his second wife. And Mary Lou is the direct descendant of Kiki Soblu. So, and let's go back one if we could. On the right you can see the only photograph, the only portrait of Chief Seattle from whom all further representations have been taken. There may be a second portrait of him in a group, but no one knows for sure. His eyes are closed, so in all the next representations of the ongoing, the future images in which there are paintings of Chief Seattle, they open his eyes and paint in irises and pupils. So, Kiki Soblu died in 1895, and she had been named Princess Angeline by Catherine Maynard, the wife of Doc Maynard, and was held with great affection by the newcomers. She refused to go with the rest of her tribe to the Suquamish Reservation, and so stayed in Seattle. And we tracked down, about 4 or 5 years ago, the exact spot of her shack, which was just down below the market in an alley, which is inaccessible, between the parking garage of the market and the Fix Medor building. And there's about a 20-foot wide alley, and given all of the various triangulations, we discovered that that's exactly where her shack had been. And she would do the laundry and sell baskets and pose for photographs. So the ghost story is this. Now let's go one down, and I'll hurry right through it. Yeah, next slide down, I think. No, the other way, the other direction. Yeah, there we go. So one more down. While we're taking this photo, and we were in the alley, you can see that behind Ken, there's nobody around. And Clay was actually taking photos of me taking photos of the two of them. And at some point, we spent about 5 minutes taking pictures and putting on the cedar vests and caps. And at one point, Ken looked at me and said, "Gene, we got to hurry up. There are people who want to get past." I said, "What are you talking about, Ken? There's nobody pushing us to get through with this photo." And Clay is taking pictures the entire time of our picture taking. And Ken said, "Well, someone just tapped me on the elbow." And repeatedly. And I said, "Well, who do you think that person might be, Ken?" And he says, "Well, I can't say for sure, but if they weren't there, then you might be able to guess." So at that point, both Mary Lou and Ken decided that it was that maybe there was a nudge from history on Ken's elbow.
Ken calls him Grandpa.
Yeah. or great aunt.
There we go. Well, one thing we are all enamored of, those of us who have grown up here, and even those who came later and have affixed our affection to this city, is the World's Fair in '62. But what many people don't realize is that we had a World's Fair long before them, in 1909, and it was called the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition. And we featured that. For short, it's called the AYPE. It was a big deal, big deal for Seattle at a time when World's Fairs were a big deal. They were sweeping the country, and it was held at the University of Washington campus. In fact, many of the buildings that were built for it, it created a layout for the campus that wasn't there. You know, the University of Washington started just a few blocks from here downtown, and then later moved out to what we now know as the University District. And I just wanted you to see an example of an AYPE column, not only to get across to people that we had a World's Fair before the '62 fair, but just to see how vast it was. We've done several columns. One Gene did with a drone to match a balloon shot. In those days, you could take a hot air balloon to shoot photos for special occasions. This photo looks north. If you're familiar with the U District, you can see on the left is 15th Avenue going north. And it was taken from the top of the AYPE Ferris wheel. No Ferris wheel there today, but let's move the slide ahead one. There is the then photo. One of the fun things here, you know, when you blow these photos up, you can ask people to look for things in them. And there's just a profusion of flags in this photo. And I ended up counting about 75 flags. And the just the detail is stunning. Next slide, please. We could not have a Ferris wheel, but fortunately we got to the top of the physics and astronomy building at the University of Washington, and it fairly well approximated the view of the previous photo. And obviously you can see building and construction in the foreground. Cranes are seemingly a permanent fixture of our various neighborhoods in downtown. And I want you to take a look at, let's go back to the previous slide. This building is the architecture, or is it, I gotta read the column. Is it architecture or agriculture, Gene? I think it's agriculture, an A word. Take a look at that, and then let's go with one slide forward. Can you find the agriculture building? The only thing really that's left on the UW campus. Many of the buildings that were built for the AYPE were temporary. They were built to last only for the fair. Some of them lasted much longer, but all of this has built up since the 1909 fair. Gene, your turn.
Okay. Well, now we're going to tell one of those scandalous stories that we have partners in telling our stories, and a fellow that began...
Gene, I grew up on Mercer Island, and I have a classmate in the audience here, Diane Ip. She's going to be particularly interested in this one.
Aha! Well, you may know this story already, Dan. Ron Edge, who is a archivist and historian and a collector of ephemera that go back to the beginnings of Seattle history, provided me with a photo of the then photo up on the left here, and said, "Boy, Gene, you should look at this. This guy was a bit of a scoundrel, and it's a fascinating story." So let's go to that photo. Let's just go one down. And this fellow had the unlikely name of Cicero Newell. And there he is to the left, and with his wife Emma. And this was taken in 1904, in the summer. And he had moved out from Seattle, where he had what he called, it was basically a school for incorrigible boys and girls. And so if they were behavior problems, Seattle schools at that point, the public schools had nowhere to send them. So they ended up sending them out to Major Newell's school, and he took the worst of the worst. And for some reason, and I never understood why, he was a Civil War veteran. He'd been decorated by Lincoln personally for bravery. And then after the war, he went out and lived with the Dakota Sioux, and wrote admiring books about Sioux life and philosophy, and was as close to being a supporter of Native rights as probably any one of his ilk. But this old military man came to Seattle in 1890 with his wife and opened up these homes for errant kids, for bad boys, they call them. And at one point, something changed, and his methods they adapted to imprison and punish these kids in ways that really caught the conscience of Seattle, and ended up on the front page of both newspapers, both the major dailies. And at one point, and I don't cover it in this story, but when he had a 6-year-old boy who was one of the bad boys who kept running away from home and tried to run away from Major Newell's home for incorrigibles. And so the 6-year-old boy was found wandering the waterfront, looking for his father, who was a sailor, looking for his dad, and he was in shackles. He escaped, and he was still wearing the handcuffs and leg shackles, this 6-year-old. Well, that ended up on the front page of the paper, and finally Major Newell realized that he'd probably better decamp from Seattle, so they found about 13 acres on Mercer Island, and what you're looking at is what became Luther Burbank Park. And Major Newell and his wife started this school, and you can see in this portrait, all of the boys lined up behind are members of this of that first class on Mercer Island. They did not have buildings yet, so they had them all living in tents for that summer. And by I think very quickly they built up some wood structures. But the I can't read my card. In any case, there's 2 of these boys had been sent to Major Newell. Let me get their names. I forget them. They were 13-year-olds. William Kiger and Albert Cook. And they tried to escape Mercer Island before. Now, at this point, there were no bridges to Mercer Island. You could only escape using boats. And so they had tried to escape once before and been captured and put in chains. So they were locked up at night and put in a room and had their chains and were locked together so that they couldn't escape easily. And one night in November of 2004, so this is maybe 4 months after this picture was taken, and I imagine they're 13-year-olds, so I'm looking at these 2 kids, or maybe these 2 at the end. I'm assuming those are the 2 errant lads who are 13-year-olds. Now here's a weird thing. Look at how he's dressed. He was an Army major, and for some reason he decided that he wanted to dress all of his inmates as sailors. And he himself dressed as a sailor. So he became not major, but a kind of an admiral, I guess. And no one has ever explained that to me. Well, in November, on a cold night, these 2 boys chained together lifted up their manacles and their chains and their shackles and snuck out for the second time. They knew that down below a neighbor had a leaky rowboat. So they crept into the rowboat and, holding their chains so they didn't clank, they crept into the rowboat and spent the entire night crossing the East Channel, slowly rowing their way. And finally, around dawn, it took them 5 or 6 hours to cross the channel in this leaky rowboat. And finally, they ended up on the eastern side in Bellevue, where there were railway workers who were working on the railroad, and found them and wrapped them in cloth and sent them away to Renton, where they were escapees from Major Newell. Well, it became, so all of their story within about a week ended up on the front page of both the PI and the Times. And within a few months, Major Newell was removed from his position. However, the industrial school went on, and you can still see the remains of it because the structures that existed for its purpose. If you go down at the end of Luther Burbank, you'll see what appeared to be an old dairy. And those low concrete walls in that structure still remain from the seeds that were planted by Cicero Newell. Newell, I think, lived about another 10 years and continued lecturing about his love of the Sioux, but was left, oh, there's the concrete, right there. And these are a few of my students participating, where they're doing a videography class, so I took them down and we repeated the photo in the old dairy.
You don't have OSHA on duty there, do you?
We don't. So any more questions as we go forward? Anything that comes to mind that you want to ask right now?
Well, the next column, this is arguable. I mean, what's your favorite thing about Seattle Center? Could be the Science Center, could be the Coliseum. It's always going to be the Coliseum to me. The Space Needle. But really, to me, the heart of the center is the Horiuchi mural. And this is a great example of how things just come out of the blue. I have a good friend from my journalism days back in the 1980s who is a distant relative of the Horiuchi family. And the Horiuchis were having a family reunion on the lawn in front of the Mural Amphitheater. And so, of course, I thought this is a chance to do an now and then column. Next slide. Now, this was the best they could do for me for a then photo. And this is, you know, back in newspaper days, you would call this a line 'em up and shoot 'em photo, prison photo almost. And this is from 1965, 3 years after the fair. The mural was put up for the fair. It was at the time considered the biggest piece of public art in the Pacific Northwest. And if you don't know where the mural is, it's right at the foot of the Space Needle. And rather tragically, when big events are on there, they have this big superstructure in front full of lights and so forth, and it kind of obscures the whole thing. Now, this is fine for what it is, and the cool thing is that the 2 little kids are grown up now and they came to the reunion. And so that was the trigger for being able to do a now photo. But if we, and Gene did pose them, you know, line them up and shoot them in front this way, but it's rather boring. Next slide, please. So while they were doing that, this little girl, one of the descendants, just started dancing and twirling. And Gene said, keep going, keep going. And he moved over to the side and got a much more dynamic photo that really expressed what the mural is all about, really highlighted the signature of the sculptor, or artist, I guess. And this is one of my favorite photos that we've ever gotten into the paper. And so, can you back up 2 slides, please? The Times seemed to agree, because most of the time, the Times designers want to make the biggest photo on the spread the then photo. This was a great exception. And we got to tell the story of Paul Horiuchi, we got to tell the story of their family, and the fact that, you know, during World War II, he and his family were in, I believe it was Idaho? No, it was Wyoming. And they were living while he was working as a janitor, and their family was hiding in a truck. And then he becomes this internationally renowned artist after moving to Seattle. So it's quite a story. You know, it's a very serious story, but I would say there's a lot of fun in this as well. This is about family reunion, reconciliation, and really celebration. So, we can move forward a couple, 3 slides, and Gene, you're on.
Okay. Well, stay up here, Clay, because this next column is one that
oh yeah, but we worked together.
we worked together on this. This was a
This is a hilarious. This is
So there's a bit of a mystery here. You can see this kind of spectacular photo of dozens and dozens of women, and we had no idea what they were doing. Had zero notion as to what. All we saw was 2015, and they were suffragists.
not 2015.
No, 1915. Sorry. So we had no idea what. Ron Edge was the source of this photo. He had found it. It never appeared in the newspapers. Far too big to ever appear in a newspaper spread.
Ron volunteers as a scanner for the Museum of History and Industry.
And so I looked at this photo and I realized that if I blew it up, I could see there was a magazine that several of the women were holding. For some reason, it was The Suffragist. And on the front cover of the magazine, there was a photograph. And I realized, I couldn't make out the date, but I knew the title. So I went to the W collection, started scanning through The Suffragists, and found that cover, which was from 2016 in April. And here's the, if I could blow it up, I'd show it to you, but it's basically, it's a suffragists opera, which appeared in New York and was reviewed in The Suffragist, which was a prominent magazine at the time. And just a quick return to, this was actually 2 years after your club was founded. So your club members may have certainly been involved with this process, because this entire group of women from all over the country were doing a whistle-stop tour lasting 6 weeks of the entire West, because the West were leading the charge in women's right to vote. And Washington State had already, by vast majority, men, to their credit, had granted women the right to vote in 1910. And so using that as a springboard, all these Western states started to assemble and say, give women the right to vote. So by 1916, most of the West had already, state by state, given women the right to vote. It wasn't for another 4 years that the 19th Amendment would pass. These women were part of that whistle-stop tour. They were celebrated all over town. They went on airplane rides and threw leaflets out of the planes. A competitor of Boeing took one of the women up into the air. Alice Paul was the instigator of all this, though she didn't herself attend. So we had this extraordinary photo. We knew the date, we knew the time, and then Clay and I started to call all of the...
We also knew the place.
We knew the place. We knew exactly where it was. And
it's right downtown, near the Bond.
It's very close, and...
Oops, Macy's. Oops,
now,
Amazon.
We did one cheat. We did one cheat, and it was because we had to cross the street to get this photo, because no one... because on the opposite side of the street it was filled with cars. What we did is we called up all the politicians, all the female politicians in our city and county, and they came and joined us. And you can see...
This was my guide to getting the names of them all. There were so many of them.
Sally Bagshaw. We had.
Well, we started out with Jenny Durkin.
That's right. So Jenny Durkin was first, and I'll get out of the way.
It had to be good with her schedule,
yeah.
And then everything else fell in.
So and then we had women coming from all over, Constance Rice and Maureen McCaffrey from History Link. We had dozens and dozens of women coming in, and League of Women Voters were a big help. They showed up with vote signs, and we did this huge portrait of women today.
And you can imagine with their schedules, you know, they wanted to get in and get out. And so finally everybody's there, and Jean says, okay, are you all ready? You know, raise your hands. And we take the photo. And
then we say, excuse them all.
It's done. Thank you very much. Great. And they all go scattered.
Up drives a couple big Cadillacs.
10 seconds later.
I see a guy in that.
There are some male supporters in the photo. There are, yeah. And in fact, if we went back to the old black and white, you will actually see Suzzalo is in this photo.
Yeah.
So he was a supporter and kind of welcomed them to university.
But back to the next one. There. So 10 seconds later, the photo's done. People are scattering. It's like success. We'll never get them back, would we? Why would we want them back? 10 seconds later, who shows up? Pramila Jayapal. Trumps all of the elected officials. She's in Congress. Come back!
So we're running around the corner shouting to people to return. And this is the photo we finally get. And I felt very bad because we lost about 20 people that we couldn't get back. But
where is she in here?
Oh man, I think she's
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah,
there's Shaman. There she is.
Right there.
There we go.
But including the sheriff who was at that point.
Sure.
Right.
King County Sheriff was Mitzi Johansson. So it was a sort of a coup in that we assembled the political class to come out and really, you know, and at that point, several of the women said that Washington State in 2019 was known as kind of the led by women. I mean, it was really profoundly the county, the city, the state. It was a real power force.
And the Times really supported this one because we were still going back and forth between 1 page and 1.5 pages, maybe 2 pages, but they put this one in the center spread of the magazine. So spectacular were these photos. Okay, next one. I don't remember. Oh, I mentioned Bob Cram. Well, Bob Cram's predecessor was Bob Hale. Anybody, how many remember Bob Hale? Seattle's first cartooning weatherman. I mean, even young people today wouldn't even know what the heck that means. But this guy was a character, and you looked forward to watching him because on live TV, he would give the weather forecast and cartoon at the same time, and he would have characters like Sammy Seagull, and he would have you know, he's got a rain cloud here, but here's the sun. And if you can read this, it says, there might just be a drop or two, and this is in 1962 during the fair. You can see the Space Needle in the Science Center in the Coliseum. This was a lot of fun to do, and the way we were able to achieve it was, there was a collector named Peter Blecka, who has more than 200 Bob Hale items. If you type in Bob Hale on Facebook, you can find his page. And as we've said before, we try to get people into our now photos. So let's move it down one slide. Here's Bob Hale in the King TV studio. Now, you know, we can't show this. This was bulldozed. I mean, there would just be a blank building. It wouldn't mean anything. But notice where he is. He's on the right side, and he's looking into a camera while he's halfway into a cartoon. Next slide. We decided, okay, this is a booklet that he put together, one of the great collectibles. Next slide. We went down to the current King headquarters, which is kitty corner from the baseball park, T-Mobile, and the big King 5 logo. And here's Pete Blecka with one of his artifacts, an original cartoon by Bob Hale, along with 2 current weather people, Rich Merritt and Rebecca Stevenson, with a camera person who brought out a camera. He's not really shooting it, it's a prop. But anybody who knows the story of Bob Hale knows that he had a tough tough time. He was very chipper and wise on the air, but he had a very difficult time that we got into in the column as well. So it's now and then about buildings and the built environment, but it's also now and then about people. And I think a lot of people, at least, isn't it easy to think that everything started with you? You know, like everybody should know what the baby boomers think, right? Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Gene, you're up. Next slide.
Okay, well,
We talked about some of this at lunch.
we did. So here we are at, this is the Empty Space Theater in their first incarnation at a little theater in Pike Place Market called Stage One. And they started out, it was following a philosophy of theater which suggested that perhaps you didn't need a lot of trappings, you didn't need a lot of sets, you didn't need all you needed was an empty space and you could make imagination happen. Well, in that photo, which was taken by the founder of the Empty Space, Burke Walker, I'd seen Burke's post on Facebook with that photo in it, and I thought, this is just glorious. Let's go straight to it. You can see all these original founding members of the Empty Space showed up in the alley for Burke's photo. The theater around the corner, as a young actress, maybe 14 years old, and when the Empty Space walked away from the Stage One theater, the little company, this is a guy named Johnny Clark, and his brothers and he started a second theater, which was really quite terrible. We did an awful production of Hamlet. And usually the cast outnumbered the audience. The Empty Space, however, moved quickly to other venues and became enormously successful. And basically they were, one of the other founding members, a writer named Carl Sanders, said how do you put it, the rep was the living room, the act was the dining room, and the Empty Space was the kitchen. It was this wonderful place where ferment happened, and these were some of the founding members, and they were quite extraordinary.
Can you say their names?
Yes.
Do you know their names?
I do know their names. I have them online. I can tell you a couple of them. Let's see. So, in the repeat, I can tell you actually who reappeared.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So let's start with this one, and I'll tell you who you might recognize some of these folks. That's Burke Walker. This is R. Hamilton Wright.
Oh, yes.
That is Kurt Beattie. This is someone I actually know and have worked with. It is Rex McDowell. This is little Johnny Clark. That's Laurie Larson. This is Tom Spiller, another stalwart of the space, and that is, what is his name? Another founder, Jim Royce. So, quick story, this was the same weekend the space was doing their 50th year anniversary reunion, and it had been stalled by COVID. And so it was just held last summer, the end of last summer. And the moment we met to take the current photo, this SOB, Tom Spiller, who's a marvelous actor, came out, and remember, all these folks except for little Johnny are in their late 60s, early 70s, and so Tom was late, and he's a great character actor and a roustabout and a bit of a vulgarian, and so he showed up, and everyone's pulling their masks off to take this photo, and Tom walks down the steps, sees Jim Royce, walks over to him and licks him across the face. And Kurt, who's a close friend, Kurt almost lost it. He was so angry. And that weekend, 150 old members of the space got together at the Playhouse at Intiman. And 25 of them came down with COVID. It was a super spreader event because these actors couldn't keep their hands and tongues off each other. And I was one of them. So I inoculated, I was just taking pictures, but they got me. So that's what theater will do to you. It's a spreader of disease.
This is remarkable as a photo because it's in color. Usually our thens are not. And then what's the now look like?
So that's the now.
That's the now.
That's-
We'll go back to the then.
And there's the
There we go.
And you can see John is now in his 60s, and so when that photo was taken, he was about 12, 13. And Jim Royce, I think, is right there. So there's a couple repeats in that photo, but anyway, so
This
that's
is called personal involvement in our work. Huh?
personal involvement in their work. So,
Oh man.
you know, we are now at 2:30.
Yeah, I
past
just
2:30.
checked. We're going to do one more pair of columns and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
We brought many more columns than we have time for, and so just know we're rounding third and heading for home. Next slide. Okay. Now, do you all remember last year Paul McCartney came to Seattle? And I thought, Paul McCartney came to Seattle. We got to do it now and then on the Beatles. When did Paul come to Seattle first? Well, obviously, many of you know, in 1964. Well, and then you think, well, you know, they came to more than 20 cities around the country. They did concerts. There's lots of photos of them in concert, you know. But what was different here? They fished out the window of the Edgewater Inn down on the waterfront. Famous photo, there are lots of renditions of it, and I thought, we've got to get some people together for the now. But they can't just be anybody. They've got to be people somehow tied to the event. And also, we had to get the Edgewaters' cooperation. Of course, they love promoting themselves, and they said, sure, you can have our Beatles suite, but who are we going to get in the now? And so Facebook can be a very wonderful vehicle to advertise for what you want. And so we went on a few pages and asked for people who were at the concert in 1964. Now, if you look at the headlines, and again, go on our blog, we post a lot of news clips as well as extra photos and videos. One of the news clips says, from 1964, the week that the Beatles came, it says that 9 out of 10 of the fans at the Coliseum were women, were girls. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew. You must have gone. There you go. You can verify this. Were you screaming?
I was, they opened up the back of the stage, you know, they were there, and then there was a little bit of backs, you know.
So you were behind them?
Front row.
Wow.
They were like from here to there, and they kept turning sideways and waving at me.
Those are the Taylor Swift tickets that I think now are selling for $1,000 a seat.
Yeah. This was, and obviously it was memorable to so many people. You know, I had a friend who his icebreaker, whenever we get together in a crowd, he'd say, okay, everybody, tell us your first concert. And it would get back to him and he'd say, Beatles, 64, and he'd blow everybody. You know, I was Herb Alpert in the Tijuana Brass. Anyway, so there were about 20 people who said they were there and they wanted to be in the photo, and then I said I'd get back to them when we set the date. And I set the date, and only, it turned out that 5 of them could come, and we needed an extra in case somebody, you know, fell through for some reason or another. And then pardon?
Or fell out the window.
We're getting to that, Gene. Also, I had to scope this out at the Edgewater about, well, how do you shoot this? Because the building is shaped like a parallelogram, and which direction are you facing? Can you go back to the previous photo? There's not a lot of clue back here. Where are they? Are they, you know, some versions of this photo, they're facing this way, and some they're facing this way. And that, you know, that could be across the bay, you know, that could be Bremerton or or whatever, and I did my best to try to coordinate it with all of the old photos. There's some black and whites to try to figure out which way they were facing. So, next slide. What I determined at the time is that we're looking northwest, not southwest, as it would be if it were flipped the other way. But this is in the way. That's not in the other photo. Well, news reports say that they remodeled this and expanded this pier, and that's Magnolia over there, which, well, if you squint, maybe that's the faint thing in the photo. Anyway, we did the photo. I'm going to get back to this. And these 4 women all were at the concert. But the windows at the Edgewater have changed. You can see they have railings. So about half of the window space is gone. And then for safety reasons, you can pull the window open only so far. And so these 3, 4 women are bravely standing on the heating vent and chairs, and I'm on the inside saying, further out, further out. This one, Joey Richardson, she says, Clay, you're going to hear from my chiropractor. And we got the photos, and so this was a very happy spread. Next slide, please. But which way were they facing? I had Dave Barry used to call this alert readers. I had an alert reader who said, have you looked at this black and white photo of this situation? And the black and white photo seems to argue for this view, not this view, because in the background there's a bit of white strip that goes up a hill. And that was the same year that they were building the Fauntleroy Expressway up West Seattle. And I'm thinking, maybe we got it wrong. And it's really facing this way. And so I explained that on the blog. But you know, how many of you have seen The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance? when the legend's better than the truth? Anyway, this was a lot of fun to do. Sometimes we can get into pop culture type stuff, as with the next column. Gene, this will be the last column we'll do, and then we'll wrap it up.
Well, this one is not inappropriate because it does involve Paul Dorpat. I was doing an article about Sick Stadium, where Jimi Hendrix played and where Elvis played in September of 1957. And I was standing out on the corner, about to take the shot of what is now a Lowe's Hardware. And I called up Paul on the phone, this is maybe 7, 8 years ago. And I called him up and said, well, Paul, I'm here. And I flashed on my own attendance of a Jimi Hendrix concert when I was 13 years old at Sick Stadium. And Paul said, oh, I was at that concert. I said, oh, really? I said, well, you know, I was up on Tightwad Hill above the stadium, looking down the free zone. It was a drizzly day, and we were all getting kind of soppy wet, and there was mud on the hill, and we would slide down and work our way back up.
Tightwad Hill was there because you could see the Seattle Rainiers games for free.
Yeah.
Instead of getting into the stadium.
And Paul said, oh, well, I was inside the stadium. I said, well, where were you? He said, oh, I was backstage with Jimmy. And it was true, because he was a concert promoter, and a couple of years before he had actually done the Sky River Festival, and so it was well known amongst musicians around the country. But there he was with Al Hendricks and Jimi Hendrix. Well, strangely enough, it took me about a year. The 51st anniversary of this concert was as soon as I could find a then photo, and there it is. This photo was taken by a fellow who's become a friend of ours. It was a Como video editor named Dave DePartie. And Dave took that photo at the age of 16 with his little cheap throwaway camera. And the photo's just terrible, but it's the only extant photo, as far as we knew at the time, of that concert.
And this color, no less. Color.
Color. But a crappy, horrible photo. Interestingly, the Jimi Hendrix, who is still reckoned to be one of the great guitarists amongst all of guitarists of any kind, classical, rock and roll. 7 weeks later in London, he died. This was the last concert he gave in the continental United States. He went to Hawaii and did a couple concerts and then went to Europe. So this was his final concert in the continental US in his hometown. It's Charles Cross, who wrote the biography of Hendrix, wrote that it had special meaning, if only because in 1957, Jimmy had sat on Tightwad Hill himself as a 14-year-old and watched Elvis perform. And from that point forward, had always dreamed of coming back to Seattle and performing. Well, I was on Tightwad Hill watching this happen, and about, maybe 20 minutes into Jimmy's first set, there were 3 bands playing that Sunday afternoon. About 6 o'clock, Jimi Hendrix came on, and about 20 minutes in, he looked up at Tightwad Hill, rain is coming down, and he said, "Let them all in." And they threw open the gates to Sick's Stadium, and in a huge mass, about 500 people came streaming down off of Tightwad Hill and came in for the last hour and 20 minutes of Jimi Hendrix playing for free. So I always imagine, after hearing the story about his experience on Tightwad Hill watching Elvis, Elvis did not let them come in for free. But after hearing that story, I thought, I'm willing to bet that Jimmy, playing for the one and only time in Sick's Stadium, looked up at Tightwad Hill and said, "I was there. I was there 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and I'm going to let him in." So, thank you so much.
Yeah, we're going to can you move through the slides quickly? Because I want to get to the very end. There's the blow up. Oh, by the way, this is in Lowe's Hardware. That's the guy in the
That's
left.
Dave DePartie.
He's the one who took the photo. And he's playing a guitar that's really an axe. You get it? An axe.
Yeah, it's the air guitar that's an axe.
And Dave Eskenazi, another friend of ours, baseball historian, he's holding up an original poster of Jimi Hendrix that he painted inside of Lowe's Hardware, which is on the site of 680.
So, and Lowe's said nothing to us as we're standing on their
Right.
property.
Keep going. This was going to be about Birdland. Keep going, keep going. Just quickly,
Yeah, just thumb right through.
because we got to get to the very end. Boom.
Oh, that would have been a good one.
Yeah, keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, keep on, there we go. Frank
We
Abe.
were talking at lunch about the incarceration, the Virginia Five, keep going. I mean, there's just fun stories with all of these. Keep going, keep going.
Great. You're just gonna have to do a part 2, so.
Well, we'd be happy to come back for you if you'd like.
Okay, keep flowing, keep pushing through. There's,
Sorry, it's just.
It's the tech, it's the tech.
This is the foundation of, there we go. A Tacoma totem pole coming down, and here's a Seattle totem pole coming down for our last column of today, which just
We
came down.
didn't want to come empty-handed. This is in Tacoma, this thing came down 2 years ago. Keep going. I mean, some of these stories become news stories. Okay, well, oops, back one, back one, back one, back one, back one. Quick note, for every column we do on our blog, we post what's called a 360 video. How many of you know what a 360 video is? It's achieved through a camera that's about the size of a hot dog, and it shoots all the surroundings 360 degrees, and we add this just as our own kind of bonus for people 50 years from now, after we're all gone. They're going to be able to see everything around a certain site that we choose to shoot a now photo at, and our very first one was on the last day you could drive the viaduct. So go to our blog, you can find or you can just go straight to YouTube and type in Seattle 360 now and then. Next slide. And our blog, you can write this down, and remember, it's easy, pauldorpat.com. And some of you already here do this, which is just enter your email address here, and you can subscribe to the blog. And every week in your email inbox, you'll get our column plus lots of extras. Next slide. If any of you wishes to contact us, come see us afterward, or here's our phone numbers and emails. Next. We were so thrilled about Paul's career as the Now and Then columnist that we put together, the byline on here is Paul Dorpat and Gene Sherrard. Gene did the heavy lifting of shooting all of the 100 best nows as nows again, because a lot of his nows have become thens. And this is a tribute to Paul. I was the editor of the book, and you are going to get copies of this book today as a gift from us. This came out in 2018. It's quite the coffee table book, and we were thrilled to put it together. It was kind of what would be the phrase, Gene? There's another word for tribute to Paul to kind of cap off his career. And there we are, all three of us, right after the book came out. So now we're done, and come and get a book.
But in our newsmakers tradition, we always like to end with a question for our guests, which is, what can we do to engage in your effort to help preserve Seattle's history and keep us all abreast of now and then? What can interested people in our book community do to help preserve that history?
Well,
Give us some tips.
that's a whole other presentation, but I'll try to hit some points very quickly. Number one, preservate. Do you know this is the 50th year of the Seattle Landmarks program? And there are more than 450 buildings and sites in Seattle that are official landmarks. Basically, they can't be torn down without approval of the landmark board. Some of them are obvious, as you can imagine, that you have to be at least 25 years old to be a landmark. And so many of the things built in our lifetimes have become landmarks. But they don't happen just by themselves. They take years to go through a nomination, designation process. And there are organizations dedicated to doing that kind of support. Number one on the list, I would say, is Historic Seattle. And if you're looking for a speaker down the road about this theme, contact Eugenia Wu at Historic Seattle, or somebody else from that organization would be terrific for you. As far as, and I see you writing down, Wu is W-O-O, and it's Eugenia at Historic Seattle. As far as just doing this in everyday life, talk it up in conversation with your friends. I mean, we're at a crossroads. I mean, we always are at a crossroads, but so many things of value are vanishing from our life while the property, you know, the profit motive just works 24/7. And you may think 450 landmarks is huge. It's nothing. It's 0.5% of all of the building sites in Seattle. And so this is just as much as any other cause that a nonprofit espouses. Preservation is a precious thing. And something you can do just in your own home is dig into your attics or garages and where are your old photos, and contact us if you think that you have a great column idea. If you come across a great photo that we could shoot again in the now, and maybe even put you in the now photo to generate interest about it, please do, because you better believe that this column helps raise the consciousness of the city as a whole. It's, you know, it may be doing fun things and going off on tangents, but in the aggregate, this is all about preservation. This is all about appreciating who we are. And where we live, I don't care if you've lived here 40 years or 40 days, we all want to be embedded, and we all want to feel like we're at home. And the more we know about our past, the happier people we are. I really believe that. And that's at the core of what we do. That's what makes it truly a labor club. You want to add?
Just that, you know, there's, the landmarking is one of the dark sides of it, and this is what some developers know, is, and we've actually written about this, is that at a certain point, even a landmark building, if you let it deteriorate long enough, if you let the rain come through the roof and you ignore it and just let it sit there, you can sidestep all of that legislation and the landmarking. When it's irrecoverable, then you can tear it down and replace it with one of the condos that are.
They call it financial hardship.
Yep. So we have to be aware of these things, and in fact, the greatest responses we see to the columns are when we talk about preservation and the loss of something that people care about. It's a huge issue, and like Victor Steinbruck, we should all be activists as far as saving those places that keep our memories of who we are and where we're from and what shaped us all alive. And once we lose all of that, we turn into kind of boxes of tippy-tappy. There's not much in between a historical sense of not only architecture, but who makes the architecture, of the human beings that live there and play there and love there. So we need to focus on the heart of those things. There's one more thing, and that is that we're about to lose all, so many newspapers are dying. We've already lost the PI and so many others. So if possible, maybe take a digital subscription to the Times, because that's one of the ways that you can continue to support local understanding of history and our culture and who we are. It's a reflection. It bounces back to us. And it's not perfect, and I wish there were lots of other ways to do that, but...
And it's not cheap either.
It's not cheap.
If you take the digital and the home delivered, it's more than $900 a year now.
Yeah.
I used to collect for the Times when I was a kid for $275 a month.
But that's another way to
Absolutely
support independent journalism and local journalism, because that's one of the great losses. And again, Clay and I are not enriched by this, but it's certainly something that we find other ways to enrich ourselves, and mostly it has to do with sharing with you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We life changes. We can't save everything. We don't want to save everything, but we got to save the good stuff. What is the good stuff? That's the question. And then how do you go to bat for it? Profit motive is going to bulldoze it every time. So it's a noble cause. Same thing applies to newspapers. Thank you.
Thank you.